Hello everyone, that manga kid here to give my review of the 4 Immigrants Manga, a Japanese experience in San Francisco from 1904 to 1924. This is the first autobiographical or non-fiction work of manga that I've ever read. I know there's a couple out there, but this is the first legitimately non-fiction title. I heard about this originally from Laura over at the Manga Hoarder a couple years ago, so it's been on my radar, but it was never something I was like, oh, I gotta run out and get that. And then I eventually was like, okay, it's time to buy it. I want to read it. Let's go. I highly recommend picking this up. As a collector, as a person who just loves manga in general and wants a piece of history in their collection, please go and get this. This was originally, the English translation was done in 1999 for this, but the original printing of the actual manga itself, or the comic itself, was in the 1930s. And it is exactly as described. We follow these 4 Japanese immigrant men who moved to San Francisco, California, in I guess 1904 is when it's starting to, it goes from 1904 to 1924. And their experience living in San Francisco at the time, there was a lot of racial tension between America and Japan at the time, and especially a lot of racism and violence and prejudice towards Japanese people in San Francisco during this period of time. So it's not, it has a lighthearted tone. It is a comedy. It's basically like a comic strip, because our Henry Kiyama, the original creator, was mimicking American newspaper comic strip styles. But yeah, this is fantastic. It was originally written, he wrote it in a mixture of Japanese and English, which I think is fascinating. The translation is obviously completely in English, but it does differentiate between the text of the what he had written in English versus what he had originally written in Japanese. And there is obviously lots of racism in this, because that it is a true account of what him and his friends were experiencing at the time. And there are depictions of, I believe there's only 2 of the comic strips that feature African Americans, but it is not, it's in a racist way. And it is explained in the notes that the depiction of Chinese people and African Americans was coming from Henry Kiyama's influence from American comics at the time, or newspaper comics. He was basically mimicking the style of what American people, or how American people were depicting the Chinese and African American people, and doesn't make it any less uncomfortable, doesn't make it any better. But again, this is literally a piece of history, and it's all, there are extensive stuff at the beginning from the person who translated this, going over kind of what everything means, and there's pictures of Henry himself there. And then in the back, there's an afterword as well, but most of the different comic strips have extensive writings on, or notes about what things mean. Yeah, notes and commentary section. So basically how I chose to read this was, you go in, so it's got the episode number, this one's episode 12, and then there's the panel numbers in the bottom as well, and then that corresponds with the it'll put so this is comic number 1 point, which is panel 8. So you'd go 1.8. This is a description of something that happened in that specific panel, which is really nice. So I basically went back and forth, and I just had my finger in one of these pages and then was over here. And each time I read through a strip, I would go to the back and check if there were any notes on that particular episode, and would read that way, so that I get the full picture of what's going on, the historical context of what was happening and what the story meant. But it is meant to be a comedy. It's written in a comedic way, to kind of not only account, or to make an account of what was going on at the time for Japanese immigrants, but also kind of make light and of the experience. And it was written for Japanese immigrants. It explains it in here that the fact that he mixed Japanese and English in his original work would mean that only people who understood both Japanese and English would be able to read this, and it would really only be people who were immigrants themselves who would really understand the story. And so, as a lot of people do, when you're going through something difficult and trying in your life, you make jokes and you kind of make fun of yourself and the situation to try and cheer yourself up. And so I really did enjoy it. I didn't think that it was like I could still laugh along with it. It wasn't all just like bleak and out of date. I think it was just very interesting to me to read about this period of time that I didn't experience, and an experience that I have not had. And yeah, I'm very happy that I did end up buying this, and I highly, highly recommend that you do as well. It didn't take long to read. I thought that it would, because I figured that the tediousness of going back and forth between the comic and then the footnotes was going to be really, really tedious and annoying, but it really wasn't. Honestly, I was super engrossed in what was happening, and it is chronological. Like, it starts in 1904 and then it goes through a bunch of events, like real life historical events that happened during that time, and talks about it and explains it. And it was so fascinating. And I do like history, but I don't read nonfiction. In general, I have a very hard time reading nonfiction. And so this is a fun way for me to get a bit of a history lesson straight from the mouth of somebody who lived and experienced it, and or I guess through a translated lens, but from the original work of that person. Yeah, it was a really interesting read. And if I read it again, now that I've read the footnotes, I won't necessarily have to go back and read them again. So next time I read it, I'll probably just be able to read through the comic itself. But yeah, even the before, like the essay at the beginning from the translator, as well as the afterword, and learning about this Henry's life, was so fascinating. So yeah, if you've read this, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you have any other, I know there's only a few that have been translated that are nonfiction titles, but if you have any other nonfiction manga titles that you want to recommend, please let me know. Anyway, thanks for watching.